Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to be talking about two movies I watched over the weekend, where basically in both movies you have five main characters, and I'm going to be talking and discussing this idea of the number five. Now, I did a little bit of research to understand what the number five means, and basically esoterically and symbolically the number five means change, or I would call it the potential to change. This is very different from like other ideas like creativity, which that refers to number three. Number five means change because, or the potential for change, because it kind of represents like your five senses, how you perceive things, how you view things, how you hear things, how you taste things, smell things, feel things, right? And also your five extremities, right? Your head, your arms and your legs. You're able to move around and move the world, right? Bend the world to your will, if you will. And also I was investigating, and I came across the idea of a star, right? And the star originally it has five different points, and originally it's called the pentagram, and the pentagram is supposed to be a protective symbol, right? So I guess any symbol, you could kind of say, is supposed to be a protective symbol. So I kind of like the idea of a star, and a star makes you like imagine things, right? And it has all that potential for change. Also with the five fingers, right? Like in each hand we have five fingers. So again, that's the potential for change, to improve things. And just it basically just expresses dynamism, right? So being dynamic. And this is because it comes after number four. Number four is a stable sign, like the four, the four, like a table has four legs, right? Or you need four of something, like if you've ever been with friends, they say two is a crowd, three is a crowd, or two is a something like that, right? And just notice how when you're like with two people, it's different how when you're with three people, right? With three people, it's a little bit more creative. With four people, it's a little bit more like, and this kind of goes in circles, right? In a cycle where basically three is like creative, dynamic, and then four is like stable, right? Like the family portrait of like, the father, the mother, the funny son, and the intelligent daughter, right? Like the Simpsons, those are that archetype, right? Which they say can be found in any group. Pretty interesting stuff too. But then it goes back to dynamic with number five, and then with number six, again, it goes back to that kind of like order, the Star of David, right? Up and down, down is up, and down and up is down. Those type of ideas. So this is post four. Now, there's a pentagram and there's a pentacle. A pentagram is the star, and a pentacle is like the same star symbol but with a circle. Now that circle, again, they say it's like protection or something like that. I don't really understand it. I know there's more to it, but basically, if the pentacle is flipped upside down, with one, like a star has a tip pointing up. And basically, if you put a tip down, it's the famous satanic symbol, right? The devil symbol. And this is because when you have the star, one of the points facing up, basically you're pointing towards the spiritual, right? Towards the the heavenly, the celestial, right? And when you have one of those points pointing down, it's like the physical or the material world over the spiritual, right? So you're going against like God's will or nature, right? And you're trying to, make your will. You're trying to impose your will, right? Which would make sense. That's why, Satanists may do that, because they're trying to have control over things. It's not necessarily like a bad thing, but, obviously it has a bad reputation. Okay, so anyway, I wanted to explain a little bit of this because I'm going to get into the movies. Now, the first movie that I watched, both of these movies, I watched them years ago, but I just rewatched them this weekend because I wanted to, and it was kind of like unintentional. I watched The Breakfast Club, and right after The Breakfast Club, I watched The Cabin in the Woods. And both of these movies have five main characters, right? There's like one that kind of stands out, but they have five people. Basically, you're exposed to five different perspectives, and a lot of times they play very well defined and very obvious archetypes or stereotypes, right? The Breakfast Club and the Cabin in the Woods are two movies completely different. The Breakfast Club is more of like a drama, teenage drama kind of comedy, and The Cabin in the Woods is terror, but it's kind of comedy. It's kind of satirical, and it's kind of meta. Because I recommend you watch The Cabin in the Woods, because especially if you like terror movies, because it gets very meta. So let me break it down first of all. The Breakfast Club is about five young high school students, which basically have to spend their Saturday in detention because they did bad things, right? And you have the typical like rebel, like criminal rebel. He calls himself a criminal in the movie. You have like this princess, like I'm popular and my daddy and all this stuff. You have like the weird girl who like she's kind of emo, doesn't talk, she's just like super weird. You have like the nerd, the brain, this guy who's like just nerdy and smart and knows things. And you have like the typical jock, like the sports guy, the athlete, right? And in this case, from the beginning, like the sports guy and the popular girl, they kind of start to get along. But the movie is just basically how throughout this Saturday, and all five of them spending time together, and just how all of them are so different, and just how all of them think that their life is bad, and they think everybody else has it better than them. You learn a lot about these characters. There's like major character development, because this movie doesn't have like action sequences. I mean, it has a famous dance sequence, but it doesn't really have like anything else. It's just pure drama. They're in the high school library like most of the movie, except for a couple scenes where they're running through the halls. But yeah, so it's like basically it reminds me of that movie where like the whole movie is between these two guys talking at a restaurant. And obviously there's a lot of depth in it, right? That's why it's like a culture classic. Okay, so basically at the end of the movie, nothing really big happens. Just at the end of the movie, they come to like the realization that they're not that alone, right? And I was doing a little bit of digging in this for this movie after I watched it for the second time, and the emo girl, her name in the movie is Allison. Allison, I guess, had the biggest payoff from this Saturday, because she was even there because she had nothing else to do. She didn't do anything bad. All the other four did do something bad, but Allison didn't do anything bad, so she didn't really deserve to be in detention, which is kind of funny. But she was there, and she basically her problem was that she didn't really belong to anybody. She didn't really have friends, so she kind of made a friend, And it's kind of weird because she actually ends up like becoming or developing like a romantic relationship with the sports guy, with the athlete, and the criminal ends up having like a relationship with the princess girl, and they kind of get together. And the brain, the nerd guy, he doesn't really get with anybody. See, that's why it's kind of weird, because five is like, if there were six or four, it's like two couples, three couples, whatever. But when there's five or three, there's always like that third wheel, that other person that doesn't really end up with anybody, right? Okay, now The Cabin in the Woods is a movie about your typical teenage or young adult college students that they're going to go on this road trip or whatever, and that's how every terror movie starts. I love these terror movies, even though they're so cliche and whatever. I don't care. I love them. And in this case, you have two girls and three boys, right? And they're going out for the weekend or something like that to this cabin. But this movie has a twist to it. From the beginning, you see these like scientists, and they're like controlling basically everything that's happening, right, in the cabin, especially. Like they're able to what is this called? They're able to spread gases throughout the house. So, they become like sexually active, or they become more aggressive, or whatever they want them to do. They kind of get them to do that. And they kind of rip on all of the terror movies, because they even have to choose their monster. Like, what's it going to be? Zombies? Is it going to be a ghost? Is it going to be like a dead girl? Is it going to be like a flying, bird? Or, is it gonna be like Jason? So it's very meta, because it plays with this idea. And you have archetypes here too. You have Kurt, for example, who is like the sports athlete guy. You have Dana, which in this case, she's like, well, in this movie they call her the Virgin. So the Virgin is in the terror movie, is the girl. She doesn't necessarily have to be a virgin, but she does have to have principles, they say. And she's the girl that survives at the end of the movie. Everybody else dies, right? Everybody else gets killed off except her. She's the girl that typically survives at the end of a terror movie. You have Marty, who in this case is like the clown, right? He's like that. He's like the friend that, like, he's the fool, right? And then you have Jules, who in this case would be like in the Breakfast Club. She's like the popular girl, like the girl with because her boyfriend is Kurt, which is the athlete, right? So they're like together and stuff. And then you have Holden. Holden, his character, and this movie's kind of weird, because in the beginning, I don't think they're really in their roles. But again, these scientists like provoke that in them. And Holden is just Kurt's friend, and they're both like jocks and athletes. And they end up, and Holden actually, Kurt ends up becoming more of an athlete, more of like a jock, more of an asshole, basically, because of some gas that the scientists throw in the house, in the cabin. And Holden ends up becoming like a smart guy, right? And it was even weird, because at one point I was like, wait, why is he all of a sudden like wearing glasses and reading a book, right? Because he wasn't before. He was like throwing a football around with Kurt. And Marty, the fool, is the one who notices this, and he's actually the one who starts, and everybody just thinks he's crazy. Everybody's like, Marty, you're just crazy, like, shut up. And Marty's the one that starts detecting this, which makes sense in an esoteric, symbolic plane, because the fool is an agent of chaos, like the Joker, right? Like a wizard, like a magician. So when he's thrown in chaos, if any of those archetypes are going to be able to deal with that, it's probably going to be the fool, because the fool knows and detects chaos and can basically adapt to the chaos, right? Because the fool doesn't really have a defined, the fool can be like anything. So this movie is very interesting, because towards the end, what ends up happening is that everybody dies except the Virgin, Dana. And then the fool comes, and the fool actually starts guiding her, like Marty and Dana start to kind of battle through the monsters, and they end up going into the secret like laboratory where the scientists are and stuff. And they end up like discovering what is happening. And eventually they get told by the director, who basically they're in charge of killing these people, because throughout history we have monsters that are living like under the earth, and if we don't keep them happy or satisfied with blood from these people, basically those monsters, those giant monsters, are going to come out. And at the end of the movie, this actually ends up happening. At the end of the movie, everybody dies, and there's a giant hand that just comes out from underneath, and like like I guess it's coming out of the earth, and they're ready to just kill all humans. So they were making like these sacrifices, but these like very scientific and like well thought out sacrifices, not like the voodoo sacrifices. It's very interesting. The movie is very interesting. It's like a little low budget. It's not wow. It's not Hollywood special effects. Again, all of this like takes place basically on the road and in a cabin. But the theme, right? I'm talking about the theme. Now, I was analyzing this, and I'm going to be talking about it from two different perspectives. You can tell me in the comments which one you think is closest to the truth. I saw correlations. Now, the movies again are completely different. They're both defined as comedy, but The Cabin in the Woods is terror, and The Breakfast Club is like drama, right? I think that's what I saw. So they're yeah, drama. They're completely different. But in both of those movies, like I said, there's a correlation, which means that there are five characters in both of them, and they're both in both movies. All 10 characters are representing archetypes, right? Which are basically like stereotypes, like the stereotypical athlete, right? The stereotypical popular girl and princess, right? The stereotypical brain or nerd or whatever, right? Um, the stereotypical like rebel and fool, right? And the stereotypical weird girl, which in this case could be labeled as the virgin. I'm not really sure. So I started to kind of like do this where I said, well, in my point of view, for example, you have Kurt, who's the athlete, and I think he's the most obvious one. Kurt from the Cabin in the Woods, the athlete, is basically like Andrew from the Breakfast Club, right? They both have that jock mentality. They're both athletes. They both play that role of being like the typical popular person, right? Now, another person that has a correlation for me is like Holden in the Cabin in the Woods, who's like, who starts acting like an intelligent person, all nerdy, and Brian in the Breakfast Club, where he's basically like the nerd, right? His story is a little sad. I think it's like one of the saddest ones. Well, apart from John, well, all five of them in the Breakfast Club their stories are kind of sad. Okay, but then after that, it starts to get a little bit tricky because you're kind of like, okay, who is, similar to whom from the other movie? I would say that Jules in this case is like the popular girl, right? And she is the girlfriend of Kurt, the popular boy. She is kind of like Claire in the Breakfast Club, where she's like, they're both popular, they're both like princesses or whatever. And then I want to say the rebel is Marty in the Cabin in the Woods, right? Because he's kind of like the fool. And in the Breakfast Club, for me, this would be John Bender, who's kind of like the main character of the Breakfast Club. Well, he's like the one that starts, doing stuff while they're in the library in the high school. And again, agent of chaos, right? They're willing to adapt, to mold, all of this stuff. And I guess Dana from the Cabin in the Woods, the virgin, would be like Allison in the Breakfast Club, where they're both, I don't want to say principled, because there is this scene where like Allison's talking about how she had sex with all these guys, but then she says that she's just kidding, right? So I guess she is principled, but she's weird. So that I don't really know if there is a direct correlation. Now, luckily or thankfully for ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT about this, and he gave me a direct correlation between all of these characters. And this is basically how it goes. I'm going to be mentioning them in a little bit. All right. So what ChatGPT basically says is that first, there's a correlation between Dana, the virgin in Cabin in the Woods, and the brain, or Brian the brain in the Breakfast Club. It says both characters are initially seen as the innocent or pure ones, focused on intellect or morality. However, they evolve beyond their stereotypical roles. Dana, while framed as the final girl or the virgin in terror movies, has a complex moral dilemma at the end. Well, she does. And Brian, though the smart kid, struggles with the pressures of being perfect and emotionally opens up during the tension. That is true. Brian goes through, like, I think one of the toughest transformations. And I guess Dana does have that final choice at the end, where it's basically she and the fool, Marty, have to die for humanity to please the gods, the monsters that I mentioned are under the earth, or basically not do that, and then just they die anyway. And the monsters, the giants, come for everybody, for all humans, right? The fool, number two, is the fool, Marty in the Cabin in the Woods, with the basket case, which is Allison in the Breakfast Club. Because they both defy initial impressions. Marty, as the stoner, is expected to be oblivious, but becomes the most insightful character. Again, the Joker, right? The fool is is supposed to be insightful. It's supposed to know things, right? Especially during times of crisis. Recognizing the manipulation of the group, yeah, by the scientist. And similarly, Allison, the outcast, is initially misunderstood but reveals layers of depth and vulnerability throughout the story. I wouldn't really combine these two, but sure, they're both kind of weird too. I guess just because of that. Number three, the athlete, Kurt in the cabin in the woods versus the athlete. Yeah, I think this is the most obvious one. Andrew in the Breakfast Club. Both Kurt and Andrew represent the jock archetype. Kurt is expected to be the strong, dominant leader, but subverts this as he showcases intelligence. He's a sociology major, and Andrew breaks down emotionally, revealing the pressure he feels to live up to masculine ideals and athletic successes. Yes, especially because of his father. I think both of those are pretty obvious. Number four, the scholar, which is Holden in the cabin in the woods, with the princess Claire in the Breakfast Club. It says Holden is the intellectual, often considered the nice guy archetype, and Claire is the perfect popular girl. Both are expected to embody certain ideals of morality and intellect, but grow to show more depth. Holden, like Claire, is expected to maintain an image, but their interactions with others lead them to question societal expectations. There was I don't agree with this one. There was a strong emphasis that I saw basically on how the princess evolves in the Breakfast Club. Claire evolves from basically thinking that she has to be like, this perfect girl, into, basically starting a romantic relationship with the rebel, with the criminal, therefore defying her parents, her social group, right? So she does have like a huge development towards the end of the movie. But Holden, not so much. Holden, I don't really think he does much. And the whore, or maybe I missed it, the whore Jules in the cabin in the woods is the same as the criminal Bender in the Breakfast Club. Jules and Bender represent the rebellious, rule-breaking archetypes. Jules, though forced into the sexy role in the ritual, yeah, she is forced because because of the gases that they're spreading out throughout the cabin, these scientists. She starts acting like someone she's not, like the stereotypical whore or dumb girl. But she initially displayed a deeper intellect, right, before being manipulated into her archetype. So these guys in Cabin in the Woods, they are kind of manipulated into their archetypes, as it says here. And Bender, the troublemaker, similarly seems rebellious on the surface, but reveals emotional trauma and vulnerability as the film progresses. Yeah, I think Bender, in this case, the rebel, he in the Breakfast Club, well, he had a lot to talk about, because he even starts talking about, the relationship between his parents at home and like a lot of deep stuff. So I was trying to like get more on this for this video, but this is all I could get, guys. So let me know what you think. I saw this correlation. I know there are probably more movies out there where you have 5 characters and each of them represent like a stereotype, especially older movies, right? Not so much like new movies, because new movies are just like weird, but on another futuristic AI technological level. But yeah, anyway, let me know what you think, and that's all I got for this video. So I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.